This video is sponsored by Bloom, makers of top-of-the-line drawer runners, hinges, and lift systems. Which is perfect, because in this video, we're making drawer bodies, drawer fronts, and cabinet doors for the man cave. Let's start with the drawer bodies. In my last video, I made all the openings in my face frames at the same height. That way all the drawers would end up having the same height as well. Which means I could batch out all the sides for all 14 drawers without fighting a bunch of different dimensions. So now, I'm getting started by ripping a sheet of 1/2-inch plywood into a bunch of long strips. When I make drawers out of plywood, I really don't like seeing that plywood edge facing up at me. So I took all the scraps from this project so far and started ripping any usable strips out of them. Then, I took those strips and ripped them in half, leaving me with a whole pile of relatively uniform walnut sticks. Then I glued all those sticks to the edges of my long plywood boards, creating a very robust sort of edge banding. Since I had so much of this to do and I only have so many bandy clamps, I would use those to clamp the surfaces together, then came back with tape to hold it while the glue dries, freeing my clamps back up to keep moving right along. While the drawer parts were drying, I moved to the cabinet bodies and installed spacers for the drawer hardware to mount to. These are just hunks of 2x4s that I cut to roughly match the depth of the cabinet, but more importantly build up the space between the cabinet wall and the inside of the face frame. Bloom makes some handy little mounting brackets that attach to the back wall of your cabinet to support the slides, which means you can skip these spacer blocks. In my case, the back wall is only a 1/4-inch veneered MDF, and I didn't trust that to hold the brackets, so I opted to go this route instead. I made sure the first block was square, then I used glue and brad nails to secure it. Then I used a spacer to line up each additional block relative to the previous one. Back to the now dry drawer parts, you can see my edge banding isn't quite perfect and needs to be trimmed flush. To do this, I set up my router table with a special fence. There's a space at the bottom that's high enough to let the overhanging walnut pass under it, then the face is flush with the cutting edge of a router bit. Now I just register the plywood face flat against the fence and trim off all the excess walnut and glue squeeze out. I tried doing this by just using a flush trim bit without the fence at first, but I found it was too difficult to keep the board straight up and down with only the 1/2-inch edge on the table, which resulted in some wavy lines in the walnut edge. With all the drawer material ready to go, I set my table saw blade height to roughly half the thickness of the boards and the fence to a 1/2-inch from the bottom. This will create a channel for the drawer bottom to slide in and position it so there's enough room for my undermount drawer hardware. After the whole stack of boards have gone through once, I bump the fence over and make another pass. After making sure my drawer bottom material fits in this dado, I run everything through one more time. Now I can start cutting things to length. All of the drawer sides are the same, so I set a stop block on my miter gauge and cut them all out. The front and back pieces are a little different because there are 3 cabinets with drawers in them and they're all different widths. So I make some adjustments for those and soon have all the pieces cut out. And one final cut is to remove the material below the dado on all the back pieces. This will make things a little easier later on. For joinery, I go just slightly more complicated than a straight-up butt joint. I like to use my router table to cut rabbets into the ends of the side pieces. I think it looks nice, but it also makes the body a little easier to assemble and a little stronger, thanks to some extra surface area for glue. With that extra shoulder, it's easy to line up the corners and pop in a few pin nails for good measure. After all 4 corners are pinned, I check for gaps and add a clamp or 2 if it looks like I need a joint to be a little tighter. A little bit of finish sanding makes everything look nice, and I round off all the corners a bit so they don't feel sharp. Then I break down a large sheet of 1/4-inch material into a bunch of drawer bottoms. I would have had to install these during the glue up if I hadn't trimmed the back pieces earlier. The other benefit to this is the drawer slide hardware requires notches cut out of the back to pass through, but this skips that part entirely. Depending on the width of the drawer, I'll run in a screw or 2 from the bottom to keep it from sagging or trying to slide out. If for whatever reason I ever needed to replace a drawer bottom, this allows me to do that without having to cut the drawer apart. To finish off the drawer bodies, I fire up my spray gun and give them a nice coat of water-based poly. So far, the entire man cave project has been finished using tung oil, but for the inside of the drawers I wanted a thicker surface finish that would be a little more durable. Besides, all those corners didn't look like much fun to wipe finish on. So now, we need to make some raised panel doors and drawer fronts. I'm not going to spend a lot of time going over the details of this because I did a highly in-depth video on the process a while back. So if you want to learn more, I'll leave a link to that video for you. After cutting the rails and stiles to their length and width, I use the router table to cut profiles into the ends of just the rails. Then I switch bits, and I cut that matching profile into the inside-facing edge of all the rails and stiles. For the raised panels themselves, I have a vertical panel bit that uses a taller fence for extra support and some lifted featherboards so that the applied pressure stays above the bit, keeping the workpiece from tipping. I take several shallow passes until I have the profile looking the way I want. Then I use my table saw to remove a little material from the backside so the panel fits inside the frame. The panels will be free-floating inside their frame to allow for wood movement, so after sanding, I like to pre-finish them. Assembly is like a simple puzzle. Just put on some glue, fit the pieces together, make sure the edges are flush, then throw on some clamps and clean up the excess glue. The drawer fronts are made the same way, but they're too small for a raised panel, so I just have a thin, pre-finished board in the center. After the glue dries, I drill a recess for the hinges in the backside of the cabinet doors using a simple jig, then I wipe on tung oil onto all the doors and drawer fronts. One last step is to put some thin spacers in the back of the drawer fronts and then drill a hole in the exact center. I'm going to mount drawer pulls in the center, and with a gap I could potentially crack the front if I over-tighten the screws. So now that we've built all the parts and pieces, it's time to get them installed into my cabinets. And that brings us to the sponsor of this video, Bloom. For the drawers, I'm using Bloom's soft close undermount tandem slides. I'll give you some more cool details about these in a second, but first we have to get them put in. Using a jig specifically designed for these slides makes it easy to hold them in position and use a center-finding drill bit to make a pilot hole. Then you can secure it with screws. I like to start with the middle screw first because that helps hold everything in place while you finagle your way to the back of the cabinet for the rearmost screw. Then, you can remove the jig and throw a screw in the front for good measure. After all the slides are installed, we need to work on the drawer body hardware. First, I use another jig to drill precisely placed holes in the back of the drawer. These are recesses where pins located on the back of the runners are going to slide into. Then, I use the same jig to drill small pilot holes in the front of the drawer body, then secure the left and right side locking clips. Bloom offers a few different types of these clips, but these ones have built-in vertical and horizontal adjustment for fine-tuning the position of your drawer. I put a piece of tape on the face frame and draw a straight line down the length of it to help me line up all the drawer fronts. Then one at a time, I set the drawer bodies onto the slides and lock them into the clips. I made a simple jig to help me install the fronts. It sits on the rail above it, and it gives me a place to register off of. Now I can just hold the drawer front up against the jig and slide it over to my reference line. Then I drill through my center hole into the body and run in a screw to temporarily hold everything in place. I repeat this for every drawer as I move up the cabinet. Then, being careful not to let the fronts twist, I pull the drawers out, drill pilot holes, and run in screws from the inside to hold the faces permanently. With them all locked in, I check to see that the sides are all in line. You can see that I have one drawer where I must have slipped and it slid out of line. Now this is the part that takes Bloom's stuff to the next level. All I have to do is slide the drawer out and make a little adjustment to these knobs on the bottom, and boom! It's perfect! These clips also have some up and down adjustment if you need it. Look at how close the top right edge of the drawer comes to the face frame. By sliding this toggle in or out, you can adjust the vertical position of the drawer. The last step for the drawers is to attach the pulls. I removed the temporary screws and pushed the machine screws in from the back and threaded on the pulls. These needed to be pretty tight to keep the hardware from twisting. This is why I added those little spacer strips earlier, so I could get these really tight without fear of splitting the wood. Alright, let's finish this off by installing some of Bloom's soft close door hinges. Attaching them to the doors is really easy with the recesses and mounting holes pre-drilled. Then, at the cabinet, I hold the door up and figure out where I want it. The mounting screws are pre-installed in the hinge, and with just a little bit of the pointy end sticking out the back. I pressed this point into the face frame and marked the spot, then drilled a pilot hole at that location. Next, I drove in the screw, then repeated the marking and drilling for the bottom hinge. I made a scrap block to hold up the second door at the same height, then marked and drilled both of the remaining holes and mounted this door. You can see that I didn't quite get it lined up perfectly, but that's okay because the Bloom hinges are also adjustable. By turning this screw on both hinges, I can raise or lower the door to bring it into perfect alignment with the other one. That other screw will push the door left or right, or give it some twist depending on how you adjust both hinges. This can be used to even up the gap between doors or to help you get them level. So that's it for now, guys. Thanks to Bloom, I have some completed cabinets with truly top-of-the-line hardware. That smooth, soft close action is just what this room needed. Make sure you check out all the links in the description below. You can find all the hardware from Bloom, all the tools I used, and all the links to the other videos in this series. In the next video, I'm going to show you how I installed the cabinets, and maybe I'll work the solid bench top into that one as well. Thanks for watching.